Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Padavaraja Acharya Astotara Sata Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Shri Shri Koda Nitai Maya Pushashi Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Okay, so we're reading from the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, volume 5, 6, Uniting Two Worlds, and India Unifying ISKCON. The GBC met, discussed all day, and by evening had a list of revolutions pertaining to the divisions of ashram in ISKCON. Husbandless women with children could not live in ISKCON temples. Husband and wife could not live in ISKCON temples, even if separately. Before entering marriage, devotees should have a means of supporting themselves and not expect to live off ISKCON. Upon getting married, a householder would be financially responsible for his wife until such a time as he took sannyas. Reading the resolutions to Prabhupada in his room usually evoked little verbal response from him. His practice was generally to nod in approval or occasionally to comment. But when he heard the resolution that husbandless women with children could not stay in the temples, he uttered a thoughtful, Then he said, "As for me, my only concern is that they shall not waste their valuable human life." He was speaking not in the tone of the official head of the society, who could veto resolutions, but in a very personal, humble way as a pure devotee. After so much struggle, he said, "They have got this human form, and I do not want that they should miss the opportunity. As for me, I cannot discriminate. Man, woman, child, rich, poor, educated or foolish, let them all come, and let them take Krishna consciousness so that they will not waste their human life." Although the GBC members usually had plenty to say, after these remarks from Prabhupada, they remained silent. Finally, Tamal Krishna Goswami, the elected GBC chairman for the year, spoke. "Yes, Srila Prabhupada," he said, "so we will strike that resolution." Prabhupada also disapproved the resolution that a householder would have to give financial support for his wife for the rest of his life until he took sannyas. You each be guru, he said. As I have 5,000 disciples or 10,000, so you have 10,000 each. In this way, create branches and branches of the Chaitanya tree. But you have to be spiritually strong. This means chanting your rounds and following the 4 rules. It is not an artificial show. It is not a material thing. Chant and follow the 4 rules and pray to Krishna in helplessness. We have to have enthusiasm. If we lose our enthusiasm, everything will become slack. In old age, I came out from Vrindavan. I had no money, nothing, but I thought, let me try. Bhagavan spoke out spontaneously. You're still enthusiastic, Srila Prabhupada. Yes, Prabhupada smiled. I am enthusiastic. I don't think I am an old man. Sometimes we think we are old, said Bhagavan. No one is old, said Prabhupada. Nahanyate hanyamane sharire. Sometimes in old age one is pushed down, but I am enthusiastic. Prabhupada said he was pleased at most of the resolutions because they indicated that a strong GBC was now ready to relieve him so he could. He said that the devotees would have to strictly follow for the entire year what the GBC had agreed on. There should be no changes unless he approved, and at the next annual meeting they could make any changes necessary. The GBC chairman then called for a vote on an unresolved topic from the day's meeting. The topic had been discussed, but since it has not been approved, the chairman called for a vote. Everyone voted yes by raising their right hand. Then Srila Prabhupada raised his hand also. His disciples immediately laughed at this endearing gesture. Yes, Prabhupada said, I am simply following the GBC. Whatever you say, I have to follow. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. You could give a seminar just on what we read then. That whole section, there is so much to unpack there. There's so much to unpack and explain just in that one little bit. Leave it for another time. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 10, Maharaj Rahugana meets Jad Bharat, text number 5. This is a very, you know the meter for this? Just read it. Are we doing response or am I just read through it? Yeah, it's very technical. Okay. Samsagiko dosha eva nunam ekasyapi savesham samsagikanam bhavitam ahati nischitya nishamya kripana vacho rajarahu gana upasita vridopi nisargena balat krita ishad utita manyo avispasta brahma Tejasam jata vedasham eva raja sarvita matya aha. Hare Krishna. So, word for word. Samsagika, resulting from intimate association. Dosha, a fault. Eva, indeed. Nunam, certainly. Ekasya, of one. Api, although. Sarvesham, of all other. Samsagikanam, persons associated with him. Bhavitam, to become. Arhati, is able. Iti, thus. Nischitya, ascertaining. Nishamya, by hearing. Kripanavacha, the words of the poor servants who were very afraid of being punished. Raja, the king. Rahugana, Rahugana. Upasita Vrida, having served and heard from many elderly sages. Api, in spite of. Nisargena, by his personal nature, which was that of a Kshatriya. Balat, by force. Krita, done. Ishat, slightly. Utita, awakened. Manu, whose anger. Avispasta, not being distinctly visible. Brahmatejasam, his, Jad Bharat's spiritual effulgence. Jata Vetasam, a fire covered by ashes in Vedic ritualistic ceremonies. Eva, like. Rajasa Avrita, covered by the mode of passion. Mati, whose mind. Aha, said. It's quite a handful. Translation. King Rahugana could understand the speeches given by the carriers who were afraid of being punished. He could also understand that simply due to the fault of one person, the palanquin was not being carried properly. Knowing this perfectly well and hearing their appeal, he became a little angry, although he was very advanced in political science and was very experienced. His anger arose due to his inborn nature as a king. Actually, King Rahugana's mind was covered by the mode of passion, and he therefore spoke as follows to Jad Bharat, whose Brahman effulgence was not clearly visible, being covered like a fire covered by ashes. Purport. The distinction between Rajagun and Sattvagun is explained in this verse. Although the king was very upright and advanced in political science and governmental management, he was nonetheless in the mode of passion, and therefore, due to a slight agitation, he became angry. Jad Bharat, despite all kinds of injustice endured because of his deaf and dumb display, remained silent by the strength of his spiritual advancement. Nonetheless, his Brahmateja, his Brahman effulgence, was indistinctly visible in his person. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vatam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parajana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Sanyavadi Pastijade Shatarane Vanchakalpaturubhyascha kripa sindubhevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Excuse me, a little bit short of breath. I noticed that there's subtitles coming up. What happens with chanting of mantras and things? Does it pick them up, or does it come up with all sorts of weird and wonderful? Okay, so it's a short purport, a long verse. And there's a few things that come to mind, a few things that came to mind when I was going through it this morning. Excuse me if I'm yawning a little. I've got a little bit of a tight chest just now, and it's causing me to become a bit tired, and therefore I'm yawning quite a lot. So, okay, so the first thing is that in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, actually for some of you, I know Laura's coming and maybe some who are online, we've been doing this Gita Life program every Saturday online, and we're sort of going through the Bhagavad Gita systematically. It's not our course. The course was designed by devotees down at Bhaktivedanta Manor, particularly Sutapa Prabhu, who gets the credit. But we've really been opening it up, really kind of stretching it out over a long period of time, probably a lot more than normal. And over quite a few weeks we were discussing chapter 4. And the nature of the Gita Life course is that every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita has an acronym to help you kind of remember the chapter, help you to sort of not necessarily memorize the entire chapter, but at least memorize the flow of each chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So you know, what themes are there in each chapter. And also if you're looking for some information in the Bhagavad Gita, then if you're able to memorize these acronyms, then you'll have an idea where to find that information. I'm going to have to take this off. I'm sorry. Offensive to Mahaprasadam. I forgot to take my hay fever tablet this morning, and it's that time of year. So there you go, Felix. Hare Krishna. It's that time of year. I can feel my nose filling up just by having the garland on. I'm too impious to be able to wear the Lord's Mahaprasadam. Could we open that back window, get some sunlight in? Yeah, so chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita, the acronym. Laura, you remember the acronym for chapter 4? Putting you on the spot a little. EARS. EARS. So that stands for eternal religion. Let's try and remember it. Removing reactions. Accurate understanding. Eternal religion, accurate understanding, removing reactions, and sacrifice. So those are the 4. Yeah, so they're good. The acronyms work if you spend time to memorize them. So eternal religion, accurate understanding, removing reactions, and sacrifice. So these are like the 4 areas of information that you'll find in chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita. And the first part, eternal education. Sorry, did I say eternal religion? I meant eternal education. Eternal education. It's an interesting point because very often when we are sort of teaching about the principle of the Guru Parampara, then very often one of the verses which is sort of referred to probably more than any other verse is this verse 2, right? Evam parampara praptam. Yeah, verse 2 in chapter 4. Evam parampara praptam imam raja seovidu sakalenaha mahata yoganastam parantapa. So this supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession. So that is usually the verse that we will refer to if we're sort of explaining the principle of disciplic succession, parampara. Evam parampara praptam. This knowledge is received through disciplic succession. But when we think of disciplic succession, very often what we're thinking about is the guru and disciple. You know, we have like in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita as it is, at the end of the introduction, Srila Prabhupada lists the disciplic succession. So I won't read it all, but Krishna, and then Brahma, Narada, Vyas, Madhva, Papanab, Nrihari, on, and then we get to Lord Chaitanya, and then Rupa Goswami, Swarupa Sanatan, the 6 Goswamis, and then we reach the disciplic succession that we see on the altar. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Jagannath Das Babaji, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Gaura Kishore Das Babaji, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So when we're thinking Evam Parampara Praptam, that's very often what comes to mind, is the disciplic succession of gurus and acharyas who have come from Krishna, who have descended from Krishna, and who have passed on this knowledge millennium after millennium. And that's not an incorrect understanding. But an interesting thing about that verse, Evam Parampara Praptam, Imam Rajaseo Vidu. This supreme science is thus received in disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. So who's Krishna speaking the Bhagavad Gita to? He's not speaking the Bhagavad Gita to Vyasadeva or to a great acharya at that time. He's speaking to Arjuna. Arjuna's a Kshatriya. Arjuna's a king. He's a prince. You know, this is who the knowledge is, well, maybe not only meant for, but Krishna's really emphasizing the need that this knowledge is presented to the kings, to the leaders, to the rulers of society. For a number of reasons. First of all, as Krishna says himself in the Gita, I forget the Sanskrit, but whatever action a great man performs, common people follow. What's the Sanskrit for that verse? Anyone remember? Yadyadacharasti Shreshtas. Is it? No, anyway, not important. But at least not important in this context. So whatever action a great person performs, common people follow. You know, so the head. I mean, in an ideal world, you know, the leaders and the rulers, and you know, in one sense, they are great people. They obviously have great karma. They obviously have very, very impressive karma to be in a position where they're governing entire countries or entire cities, or, you know, in some cases almost entire continents. Like you have, you know, things like the European Union and, you know, the United States of America. It's like, you know, these are like entire continents that are almost being not governed literally by one person, but you ultimately have, you know, one person or a small handful of people who are kind of responsible and who are being looked to by the mass of people and followed. Well, in an ideal world, they would be followed by the mass of people. So it's very impressive karma to be in a situation like that. Now, you know, obviously we could go off on a whole tangent of, you know, are they actually acting as leaders? Are they worth being followed? And so on and so on. But this is the point that's coming up here is, you know, the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita is meant for the rulers. And so, you know, here you have a situation where, you know, prior to being instructed by Jad Bharat, I mean, I'm sure King Rahugana was a great personality even prior to that. You know, at this particular time in history, you know, most of the kings were already great personalities who were following in many ways the principles of Dharma. But still, the point that's being made here is that the king was acting a little bit out of place. He was unnecessarily manifesting anger in that particular situation. He wasn't able to recognize or identify Jad Bharat at that particular time and place. And then later on, when Jad Bharat instructs him, then the king, you know, becomes submissive to that instruction and takes that instruction to heart and acts according to that instruction. He becomes a different person. He sees things differently as a result of receiving that instruction. So, you know, this is the first, or one of the first things that comes to mind is this principle that, you know, this knowledge, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, all this spiritual wisdom, it's not only meant for the monks in the monasteries. It's meant for the general mass of people. And we shouldn't necessarily expect or presume that the general mass of people are to become monks in the monasteries. But rather, Krishna consciousness, there will always be a place for a Brahminical class of people. And Srila Prabhupada really indicated that that's kind of what ISKCON is sort of meant to be, is like a Brahminical class of people who are there to give guidance and instruction for the general mass of people and show people how to add Krishna to what is already there in the world. You know, I listened to an interesting discussion a few days ago with, some of you may know Mother Urmila Mataji. She's a very senior Vaishnavi, disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and she was speaking about, you know, if we look into the future, say we go forward in time to whenever that point in time is, that Lord Chaitanya's movement has spread successfully all around the world. You know, the general mass of people have taken to the Sankirtan movement. what will the world look like? What do we think the world is actually going to look like at that point in time? Do we think it's going to be just a gigantic farm community, spreading all over the world? There's many things are still going to be in place. Hospitals are still going to be there. Surgeries are going to be there. Police force is still going to be there. Lawyers are still going to be there. Shops are going to be there. Computer industry is going to be there. The textile industry is going to be there. We would hope that some things aren't there anymore, like, for instance, slaughterhouses and, but even Srila Prabhupada in the Srimad Bhagavatam even says that, we won't go into too much depth about it, but Prabhupada even says when Krishna enters Dwarka and many well-known prostitutes come, and then Prabhupada says in the purport, this is also a requirement in society. So I'm not saying that we hope these things will still be there, but we sometimes have a conception of what the world will look like when the Sankirtan movement spreads around the world. But in many, many ways, it will look as it is right now, but with Krishna added to that, So this knowledge is not just meant that everyone in the world shaves their head, moves in, and the whole world becomes a gigantic farm community, but it's all about how to add Krishna to politics, how to add Krishna to monarchy, how to add Krishna to mercantile principles, how to add Krishna to leadership principles, how to add Krishna already there, and then by Krishna's presence in the form of his holy name, all the unwanted things that are there within those different areas of life, they will become removed. But it's not that all these different areas of life will cease to exist. If we were to ask the members of ISKCON's GBC whether they would aspire to become presidents, prime ministers, military heads of the military, probably most of them would say no. They're quite happy just being in a Brahminical position, giving spiritual guidance. So that's why in Varnashram you have this situation where you have the Brahmins who are the heads of society, but they're not running society. They're not running the world. They're advising, they're guiding. And then the leaders, they're doing the running, they're doing the organizing and the leadership. And then in an ideal sort of Vaishnav Vedic society, then the Shudras, the Vaishyas, the Kshatriyas, the Brahmanas, they do what they do, but Krishna is added to all of that to make it the best version of themselves. This is what Krishna consciousness is about, how to become the best version of ourselves. And we were discussing the other day that we're not the body, we're the spirit soul. We accept that. We may not realize it, but we accept it. We are not this body, but that doesn't mean we don't have a body and we don't have a mind. And as long as we are in this particular body, there are certain things which are not going to change. We are who we are. We have a certain material nature. You can purify that material nature, but we're still going to be who we are. One devotee gave a nice example. Sorry to anyone that was there on Saturday to sort of going over the same things again. But, one devotee was saying that like in a spiritual community, and when we're describing community, we're not just talking about, those people who are living in a temple, but in our worldwide spiritual society, then, any society, any community is like a subji. So spiritual communities are non-different. They're like a subji. And, so in a subji, like for instance, you have salt. You don't see salt. When you look at a subji, you don't see the salt. But if the salt wasn't there, the subji wouldn't work. So within communities, you have people who are sort of acting behind the scenes. They're not really seen, but they're adding flavor to the community. They're making the community work. You have turmeric in a sub-G. So you have people in a community who are very, very colourful, maybe a little eccentric. They're adding colour to a community. You have chili, you have spices, you have vegetables that are giving nourishment, So all these things are needed within a sub-G for the sub-G to have the overall effect that we want it to have. So similarly, in a spiritual community, we kind of come with our material nature. It's not necessarily that we are acting the way that we're going to act in a completely unconditioned state in the spiritual world. We're acting according to our material nature, but because we're adding Krishna to that nature, then that nature becomes the best version of itself. So we become the best versions of ourselves. So we shouldn't necessarily. When I say, it's not so much that we're trying to change people's material nature. Part of sharing Krishna consciousness is not necessarily completely, and I'm sort of qualifying this, it's not just about changing people's nature. Obviously, the very unsavory and detrimental and harmful aspects of a person's nature, then we try to sort of... Krishna consciousness doesn't necessarily remove these things immediately. In time, it will purify these things. It will purify the good and bad things and ultimately free us completely from our material nature. But we have these sort of things within us. Just like in Upadeshamrita, Nectar of Instruction, Srila Rupa Goswami, right in the beginning, he says, Vacho Vegam, Manasakroda Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Udorupasta Vegam, Etam Vegam, Yovishahita Dhira Savam Apimam, Pritivim Sashishyat. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified. Prabhupada says qualified to make disciples all over the world. I've been reading commentaries, different commentaries on the Nectar of Instruction, the Upadeshamrita, and another way that's described, like, what is it? Etam Vegam Yovashahita Dira, Savam Apimim Pritivim Sashishyat. So Shishyat doesn't just mean accepting disciples, but it means giving, qualified to instruct others, qualified to teach others. So it's not necessarily that what Rupa Goswami is saying is that this is just for those people who are going to become Diksha gurus and accept disciples, because then we could just read it and think, well, this isn't for me. I don't need to follow these instructions because I'm not going to be a guru, so I don't need to control any of these things. It's meant for everyone. And one of the interesting things is that he's not saying remove these urges. He's saying a sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, who can control these urges. We may have things within us which are not so savory. Krishna consciousness is not necessarily immediately going to remove those things. If we've been practicing Krishna consciousness for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, and we still have, we're thinking, but I still become it's like if I see a pretty girl walk by, my eye kind of notices, or I hear some music that I used to listen to, my ear notices and kind of momentarily I start tapping my feet, it's like, there's some movie out and we see the poster and it's like, oh, and I'm thinking, I must be doing something wrong because these things are still sort of attracting me. But Krishna consciousness in time will remove the desire for these things. But if after so long the desire is not there, it doesn't mean that Krishna consciousness isn't working, because the instructions that devotees like Srila Rupa Goswami are giving and Krishna is giving in the Bhagavad Gita is they're teaching us how to control these things. They're giving us instructions. If you follow these things, you'll be able to control these urges. You'll be able to tolerate these urges. So just like here, the king, he's becoming angry unnecessarily. So in Upadeshamrita, Rupa Goswami is saying that anger is one of the urges to be tolerated. But then later on in Srila Prabhupada's purport, he says that every single one of these urges can be utilized in Krishna's service. So we have certain things within us which are not necessarily going to go away, but if we can find how to channel those things, how to use those things in Krishna's service. And this is another example of why, a book like the Upadeshamrita is not only just meant for the Diksha gurus. The example that Prabhupada gives in the purport of tolerating anger, he mentions two persons. Anyone remember the examples in Nectar of Instruction that Srila Prabhupada gives for tolerating anger? Anyone know? Javat?
One is
Hanuman, and the other?
Arjuna.
Yeah, Arjuna. Hanuman and Arjuna. Hanuman's not a Diksha guru, he's a warrior monkey. But Prabhupada's giving him as the example that Hanuman kept his anger in check until it was necessary to be used in Krishna's service or in Lord Ram's service. Arjuna the same. He used his anger to serve Krishna on the battlefield. You can't kind of go out on a place like the battlefield of Kurukshetra and be all meek and humble. You've got to fight, you've got to become angry, you've got to get this rage up. When Abhimanyu was killed, Arjuna was like fire. The next day he slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people in retaliation for his one son being killed, and Krishna helped him. So there's a place for these things. There's a place for anger. There's a place for sex. There's a place for anger. There's a place for eating. What is it? The urge to speak. We're not supposed to be silent. There's a time for speaking. The mind. All these things can be used in Krishna's service. Every one of them. So Krishna consciousness isn't necessarily going to just remove these things. It may, or Krishna may decide that he wants us to act in a particular way for the sake of sharing Krishna consciousness with others, establishing a more dharmic society, and therefore these things may have their place for that. These material tendencies, material abilities, material skills, material strengths, none of these things really ultimately have anything to do with who we are. We're the spirit soul. Rupa Goswami, he's Rupa Manjari. He's not, Rupa Manjari is not a scholar of many, many different languages. But Rupa Goswami was, because he had that material ability, and he used that material ability to write books and to, present the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Rupa Manjari is not necessarily doing that. She's not necessarily having philosophical discourses in the spiritual world, talking about the different stages of bhakti. She's engaging in the service of Radha and Krishna in the groves of Vrindavan. But Rupa Goswami, he's using the material abilities that he's been blessed with by Krishna to spread the mission of Lord Chaitanya. Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Padati Swapadantikam. When will Srila Rupa Goswami, who is established within the material world the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter under his lotus feet? So each and every one of us has material nature, and that material nature we have to find out how can we add Krishna to that material nature so that we can become the best versions of ourselves, and so that we can actually really effectively spread the Krishna consciousness movement. Even Srila Prabhupada was, he was a businessman. He was always, Prabhupada himself said there was never a time when he didn't remember Krishna. But still he had certain material abilities, and he used those to establish ISKCON, to establish all these sort of, financial aspects of ISKCON and managerial aspects of ISKCON and things like that. He had all this expertise. Now Krishna blessed him with that. It's not that these things don't come from Krishna, but still it's part of our sort of material. It's part of what we're given by Krishna. I'm choosing my words carefully because I don't want it to be misunderstood. I'm saying that people like Srila Prabhupada are materially conditioned souls. They're not. But still everyone has material strengths and abilities and skills that we're given by Krishna. Krishna, what is it? Rasoham apsokantiya prabhasmi sasisuryo pranavasavavedeshu shabdakam purushu nrishu. Krishna says, I am the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon, the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras, the sound in ether, and ability in man. Krishna is the ability in man or woman. Krishna is the ability in humanity. So, whatever abilities we have, they may be material, but they're given by Krishna. They're coming from Krishna. Krishna is blessing us with those abilities. And if we can learn to use those skills and strengths in Krishna consciousness rather than try to deny them, then that becomes the perfection. That becomes the perfection of life. And that becomes the perfection of society. That's the perfection of humanity. Is that, whatever is there, add Krishna. And Krishna will remove whatever he doesn't want to be there. If we add Krishna to the world, which in Kali Yuga means adding the holy names, adding the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, we add Krishna to the world in the form of transcendental sound vibration, and then Krishna will then purify and empower everyone to be able to use what they have in Krishna's service. And simultaneously, whatever Krishna doesn't want to be there, he will purify that, he will remove that, or he will teach us how to control that and how to tolerate that, you see. So this is what the Sankirtan movement is. This is what Krishna consciousness is. Add Krishna to the world. Add Krishna to what's there. We shouldn't. It's not that we don't want farm communities. It's not that we don't want spiritual societies. But also we shouldn't necessarily have unrealistic dreams or expectations of what it means that Krishna consciousness will spread throughout the world. Prabhupada wanted everything to be used in Krishna's service. Without wanting to get into too much Maya, there's a lot that people can do amazing things nowadays with material abilities. It's like you look at the kind of things like, for instance, Felix has been speaking with, Gora and one or two of the devotees recently about, how can we present Krishna consciousness in the medium of film? That's not Maya. And you look at the things that you can do nowadays with film. Imagine the story of Lord Nrsingadev, giant Vijay falling. First of all, you're in the spiritual world. You see the spiritual world, giant Vijay, the fall of giant Vijay, the fight between, Varaha and Hiranyaksha, and then Hiranyakashipu out of revenge. That's like, you're talking like, 10 seasons on Netflix. That would be amazing to be able to present that, and it's so attractive. It's so attractive. These stories, if presented nicely with Vaishnavas who are producing these things and directing these things and not turning them into some impersonal version of these things, but actually presenting them as they are, because as they are is so attractive. Film, music, theatre, art, drama, politics, everything has its place in the world, and we can add Krishna to everything and make everything perfect and make everything the most perfect version of itself, So this is sort of the message. So I'll stop there. I'm looking online, at least on Facebook, but I can't see any questions. There's no questions. Okay, so for those who are watching online, we can ask the devotees in the temple here if they have any questions or comments, and then while they're sharing their thoughts and realizations, if anyone online would like to either share some reflections or realizations or ask any questions, then you can type those in now while we're asking the devotees in the temple if they have any questions or comments, thoughts, reflections. Raghunath Prabhu.
Thank you for asking us. I just wanted to kind of clarify a little bit more about you were speaking about material abilities. As you know, when we take a prasadam or bhoga and offer it to Krishna, then it's no more material than spiritual. So I understand when you use this kind of language to help to understand how
Yeah, good point. So for the just in case anyone couldn't hear that online, so what Raghunath's saying is that, I was kind of separating material from spiritual, and Raghunath's saying that when we engage in Krishna's service, then it becomes spiritual. So that's a fact. And Krishna is in every atom. Krishna, and in actual fact, everything that exists is all Krishna's energy. Everything, whether it's material world, the spiritual world, everything is Krishna's energy. Everything comes from Krishna. Everything belongs to Krishna. Everything returns to Krishna. Everything is ultimately part of Krishna. So what is it that makes something material is really how it is used. That's what determines whether something is mundane, that it is misused, that energy then becomes misused, misdirected. When material energy by its nature is part of Krishna's energy, so it always has a divine aspect to it. We speak about Maya, but Maya is described in Bhagavad Gita, what is it, a deva, like divine, this divine energy of mind, this divine energy of mind consisting of the three modes of material nature. So Krishna is describing the material nature as divine. Divine means, by its very definition, is godly. So the material world, by its, it is godly in the sense that it's part of Krishna's energy. It comes from Krishna. It belongs to Krishna. But if it is misused, misdirected, then it takes on like a mundane quality or a mundane nature. So, and then in order to help us to become quite determined to follow the path of Krishna consciousness, then acharyas like Srila Prabhupada will sort of speak about material energy as being sort of separate from Krishna. They will use a language that separates it from Krishna in order to warn us, be very careful dealing with the material energy, because although it comes from Krishna, although it belongs to Krishna, if it is misused, then it's going to cause us serious problems and it's going to take us away from Krishna, because it's very powerful. Because it belongs to Krishna, it's part of Krishna, it's his energy, it's extremely powerful, it's much more powerful than we are. We are Antaranga Shakti. Is that the right word? Where you have internal, external, and then marginal. What's the word for marginal? Tatastha Shakti. So the living entity is Tatastha Shakti. And that means that by our very nature, we are always going to be under the control of Krishna. Now, whether that means we're under the control of Krishna's material energy or under the control of Krishna's spiritual energy, we're always going to be under that control. So the goal of transcendentalists is that we're trying to shift from being under the control of Krishna's material energy to the control of Krishna's spiritual energy. But how we do that in the material world is to use the material energy in the service of Krishna, and then the material energy becomes spiritualized. Because Krishna is in the heart of every atom. Anything that is used in Krishna's service, Krishna within that energy can then completely spiritualize it. So our own bodies can become completely spiritualized, our skills, our abilities, they become spiritualized. Everything that we use in Krishna's service, everything that we do for Krishna, even in the material world, becomes transcendental, or at least becomes spiritualized. So that's why Srila Prabhupada said, our temples are not part of the material world, it's Vaikuntha. The temple is Vaikuntha. And like you say, Raghunath, the body of the spiritual master is not a material body, it's a spiritual body because it's completely used in Krishna's service. So yeah, is that okay? Does that sort of clarify that? Yeah. Anything else on that, or you want to sort of...
No.
Is that okay? Anything online? No. Anything else from anyone here? Laura?
Thank you very much for that. I was asked a question yesterday, and it was something like, we've been given all these senses.
We've been given all these
senses to enjoy, so why can't we enjoy them? So I tried to answer the best that I could, trying to spiritualize everything rather than what you were saying about material gains, material benefits. So everything that you just said has really helped me to explain that to this person.
Yeah. Yeah, is it okay to sort of expand on that a little?
Yeah.
Yeah, because, this principle of enjoying, we're here to enjoy. I was actually listening this morning, there's an old, you can find it on YouTube, very old debate between a couple of devotees, Sri Dayananda Maharaj and someone else, and some anti-cult deprogrammers. One of them was saying, we're here, the Hare Krishnas, you're all about just everything's just bad, everything's bad. But are we not here in the world to enjoy it? Were we not put here to enjoy life to the best of our ability? But the thing is that the point of Krishna consciousness is not that we're not to enjoy. It's that because the soul by nature is Satchitananda, then you can't enjoy if we just try to enjoy it. We can't, you can enjoy. There's a lot, it's a misconception to say there's no happiness in the material world, there's no pleasure in the material world, there's loads of happiness in the material world, loads of pleasure, loads of this, but the nature of it is not such that it can actually satisfy the soul. We can stimulate the mind, the senses, the intelligence, and to a certain extent they can be stimulated and even temporarily satisfied by material pleasure, whether it's subtle pleasure, gross pleasure, whatever. We can be temporarily stimulated or satisfied by these things. Temporarily might mean for a few seconds, it might mean for a few days, few weeks, few months, even for a few years. But ultimately, the type of happiness that exists in the material world isn't the type of happiness and pleasure and satisfaction that the soul is hankering for. So there's always going to be something missing from our lives unless we add Krishna to our lives. So we can enjoy, but we're not going to be completely satisfied until we add Krishna. And then by enjoying in a Krishna conscious way, the soul is such an ananda. We're not meant to be just, dull, austere, rigid entities. We're pleasure-seeking entities. The soul is anandamaya vyasa. We are pleasure-seeking. That's our nature. Krishna's not going to make the spirit soul anandamaya vyasa and then say you're never allowed to have fun, you're never allowed to be happy. That our very nature is pleasure-seeking, ananda, blissful entities. We're pleasure-seeking, blissful entities. How can we get that happiness and the pleasure that we're seeking is by connecting with Krishna. Yoga means to connect. So through yoga we become connected with the source of pleasure. Krishna is the source of happiness, the source of pleasure, the source of joy. Everything's coming from Krishna. When we become connected to Krishna, then we fully experience and fully awaken the pleasure and the satisfaction and the happiness that we're actually hankering for. So, is that okay? Okay. So, Felix, do we have time? It's just 5:30. Do we have time for one more?
We've got 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay.
Just want to say I'm experiencing the same overpowering bliss from
Oh,
this.
Yeah.
Thanks for a wonderfully empowering class and to see things in a correct perspective, I would say, of how the preaching will take effect through ISKCON. To me, I'm looking at like the humble attempts that everyone makes on Sankirtan is trying to drop some ideas into a society really that appears to be decaying. The cities appear to be, especially now with the pandemic, they appear to be decaying. So I'm just wondering, there's a doubt there, is whether we're actually trying to address something that is, like you wouldn't add fragrance to compost. It is what it is. It's a decaying thing. It serves a certain purpose. But in some cases, just from my own experience, I'm looking at things online. There's a certain pop star that is, he's got like £80 million or something, and he's designing his own city. So all the concepts are there. He's got his own currency. He's somewhere in Africa. He's doing it. Sounds pretty cool, but it's based on some fictitious ideas, some grandiose ideas. But some of his ideas are probably quite good. So I'm just wondering whether, as ISKCON, as preachers, whether we should be thinking along the lines of redesigning the world that we live in, or whether we should actually let the more materialists do that kind of thing and just drop ideas. To what extent should we be trying to change the world? Should we be at the helm of these things, or should we be in the background
Well, ultimately, you know, ideally, we want to be at the head of things in the sense that ISKCON is meant to be a Brahminical society that is showing the world how to become Krishna conscious.
Yeah.
So, you know, a place like Mayapur is supposed to be a spiritual city, but it, you know, it's not just meant to be that this is the spiritual city and everyone. You know, Prabhupada wanted somewhere like Mayapur to show the world this is how you can live.
Yeah.
It's not that, okay, once Mayapur is done, that's it. Now we have our spiritual city and we will all go to Mayapur. And, you know, Prabhupada wanted it so that this is how it's meant to be done around the world.
Yeah.
You know, the whole world should become like that. The whole world should have, every city in the world should have a temple of the Vedic planetarium and Varnashram communities and Brahmins doing this and Kshatriyas doing that. And somewhere like Mayapur is meant to show people how the whole world should change.
Yeah.
Not that everyone just goes there, but how the whole world should change.
Yeah.
You know, it's like at one point people were, I mean, just personally speaking, someone was saying, well, why don't you just move to such and such a place? But if everyone moves to such and such a place because it's not working where you are, it's never going to work where you are. We want Krishna consciousness to spread all over the world. Not that we just make a small handful of projects around the world hugely successful, but those small handful of projects around the world are meant to show the whole world, if you do this everywhere, it will work everywhere. You know, so, but just to qualify again, like I say, it's not that we just want everything to stay as it is. You know, but the thing is that it's also maybe a misunderstanding to think that everything's just going to be torn down. You know, if 50 years from now we you know, one of us gets sick and the devotees say, well, we kind of tore all the hospitals down because they were all just Maya. We don't have hospitals anymore, just tolerate it, Prabhu. You know, it's like, you need doctors, you need hospitals. What is it? Who is it? Hanuman and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Murari Gupta's he's a doctor, you know, he's a pure devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You know, a hospital, there's going to have to be a police force. You know, like it or not, it's going to have to be there. There's going to need to be a police force. There's probably going to need to be lawyers. You know, it's like these things are going to have to be there. But then we're sort of showing how to sort of add Krishna to everything so that the undesirable, unwanted things, they become purified and dissolved. But, you know, the wonderful skills and abilities and things that we can do to spread Krishna consciousness. You know, Prabhupada said, blind man and lame man. So he said, India is lame, America is blind, or the West is blind. So bring the two together, and he said that's perfection. Spiritual knowledge combined with material technology and abilities and skills, bring the two together. Prabhupada says that's perfection. That's perfection. But obviously, you know, in an eco-friendly way. So we should stop there. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay, so we'll stop there. So thank you very much. We'll stop and move on with the day. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Antaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Shri Koda Nitai Maya Prashashi ki jai. Jai Gaur Ramanannda.
Haribol. Grace Ramanannda Prabhu ki
jai.
jai.